Montenegrins voted overwhelmingly. 90% of those who voted, but not 90%, the actual electoral turnout, I think, was around about 60% of those who voted to remain in a rump federation with Serbia, forming the new federal republic, the FRY, of which Kosovo, as you know, Kosovo then was deemed to be an integral part. But despite the crushing vote in favour of this new federation, the FRY, the identity issue again surfaced when some Montenegrin opponents of Milosevic policies tried to stir up an anti-war movement that backed the formation of the separate Montenegrin church. So at this time there was, of course, an anti-war movement going on in Montenegro around the Liberal Party, which was opposed to, and bravely opposed to, the attacks on Croatia to the 1991 war. They were a small group of people, and they remained active. And some of these people, there were sort of attempts at that stage to build on consolidate the stranded Montenegrin identity by building up the Montenegrin church, which I think always had much more political motivation than a generally religious one. But this came to a head 5 years later in 1997, when the political debate took a very decidedly different turn, when after the winter of discontent in Belgrade, Prime Minister Milo Đukanović formally broke with Milosevic. It was a fraught period when there were articles that were being written critical of Milosevic's wife. Đukanović was quoted as making statements, and suddenly a sort of gloves-off contest developed in Montenegro between erstwhile partners, Milo Đukanović and Momir Milanović, the then president of Montenegro. There was a political battle inside the reigning party, the Democratic Party of Montenegro, DPS, in which Đukanović, by far the more adept politician, exceedingly adept politician, saw off eventually his political opponent Milanović. And as he distanced himself from Milosevic and from Milanović, Đukanović became increasingly courted by the West. He made periodic visits at that time to Washington, to London, and he began to align himself at this time more with factions within Montenegro. There was a beginning of an agenda to at least advocate increasing autonomy, increasing separation from Montenegro, although it wasn't spoken about, certainly in circles just around Đukanović, about Montenegrin independence. But of course the clearest break at this point was obviously the 1999 war in Kosovo, when bravely, I think, Đukanović took a line that separated them very strongly from Serbia. And from that time on, very subtly, he continued to increase this taking of power into his own hands, into the hands of the DPS, and to surround himself with those who advocated very advanced or very enhanced form of autonomy for Montenegro. However, when Milosevic was toppled in 2000, Đukanović was caught unawares, as he wasn't really expecting this, and as his Western supporters suddenly changed tack and urged him to consolidate his links with the new Serbian Prime Minister, the 24th carat, I think one could say, a nationalist, Vojislav Koštunica. The West's determination to stifle any move towards Montenegrin independence at this point was designed, I think, very clearly to head off a similar move in Kosovo. To that end, they exerted maximum pressure to ensure that Đukanovic's government signed up in 2003 to a new union of Serbia and Montenegro. Enshrining a theoretical equality, the new union proved completely unworkable. The outcome, as we know, was a deliberate unravelling of the union by ostensibly a compliant Montenegrin government and the holding of the referendum on the issue of Montenegro's independence in May 2006. Well, it might be thought, and I won't go into this period of referendum because it would be far too time-consuming, but I do recall how cleverly it was managed in so many ways. I mean, it was a consummate demonstration of the statesmanship, I think, of the ability of the Montenegrin political elite to cock a snoot at the European Union and at the Union, which was called derisively very often Solania, or after its architect, Javier Solana. I went to Montenegro at the time of the referendum, and I couldn't help being struck. Well, I was there some time before, and I can remember in one set of elections when you had the election blackout, that it seemed to me extraordinarily significant that when you could no longer show any political broadcasts on television, suddenly there was the film Braveheart, if anyone remembers it, being screened on television, and I'm sure people were able to draw the political message that here was, Montenegro identified with Scottish clansmen, fighting for liberation against the oppressing power. Details were, I don't think any details were ignored. I can remember getting out at the new airport, which had newly opened in Podgorica, and seeing the flower beds around the airport had suddenly been planted in a selection of of yellow and red flowers, the colour of the Montenegrin flag. It was a very consummate effort, but I won't go into it because I really want to look more at the historical factors that made Montenegrins different, and that led to the fact that although for a long time it was possible, while these two entities had no common border, and while their agendas did not appear to clash openly, that Montenegrins could happily be Serbs or allow them to feel themselves as the best of Serbs, while not feeling their Montenegrin nationhood assaulted. It was really at the point when the union became possible that this developed into a clash, and I suppose one might say that the final step was then, one might have thought the final step was the independence referendum in 2006. So one would have thought that the referendum would put an end to the long-standing debate over issues of identity. But the narrowness of the pro-independence side's victory, which was 55.5% as against 44.5%, achieved with the votes, as you know, most of the non-Orthodox minorities in Montenegro, highlighted the deep division that still existed and exists to some extent within Montenegro society, and ensured that the losers would continue to claim that they felt cheated and to make allegations of irregularities and of coercion. So Montenegrins, so there were, despite this, I think one could have to say that there were many doomsayers at the time that were predicting conflict, and that this conflict really didn't happen. Nevertheless, it continued to have some traction after independence, particularly during the debates of the constitution, so particularly in 2007 in the lead up to the constitution. You had debates. It was further manifested, of course, very much at the time when Montenegro recognized in October 2008 the independence of Kosovo. At that time, you may remember that there were the Serbian bloc in Montenegro organized demonstrations, including a storming of the government building. But again, a lot of this was whipped up and it didn't come to anything violent. So if we look at the present situation now, I think where do we feel that the identity debate in Montenegro is now? I think it's true to say that it's still a live issue, but a significantly less dramatically charged one. We still have, of course, the new Serb democracy, led by Andrija Mandić, which is continuing to campaign on a program that champions the rights of those Montenegrins who consider themselves to be a branch of the Serb nation and to define themselves as ethnic Serbs. It colours, or to some extent within Montenegro, the attitude to issues such as NATO membership. And it continues still, but to a decreasing extent, I would say, to distract attention away from urgent matters such as the economy and unemployment, progress towards EU membership and problems of organised crime and corruption, judicial reform, press freedom, all the areas where Montenegro needs to make substantial progress. And this, in the past, has so long been a distracting issue. But I think, I would say that my experience and view was that this was diminishing. Whether it will be reactivated to some extent when the census is conducted in April is an interesting question. The government is making very much an attempt to present this as a statistical exercise rather than as a political issue. I suspect that some of the pro-Serbian parties will want to make it a political issue. The one thing that does tend to give some impetus to this debate, ongoing impetus to this debate, is the language issue, making Montenegrin, which happened at the time of the constitution, the official language of Montenegro, while obviously those people who call themselves ethnic Serbs want to continue to speak, they call Serbian. But on the other hand, there have been a lot of factors that have diminished this extent to this problem, and one, of course, was the enormous flow of inward investment. Montenegro, in the period 2006-2007, had by far and away the highest FDI, foreign direct investment, coming into it. Now, this wasn't evenly shared, and again, because of the geographically described areas, the areas that joined Montenegro late in the north, did not feel the benefit, have not felt the benefit of this investment to the same degree as areas on the coast and areas around Podgorica. Nevertheless, I think that there has been some benefit from this increased investment. Some benefits are starting to appear with tourism being developed in these areas, attempting to be developed. So overall, I think that this inflow of money, and to some degree reflecting credit on the Montenegrin government, considerable credit, the attempt to introduce a degree of inclusive rhetoric now into the political discourse, so that you had the Montenegrin speaker, the parliament speaker, Ranko Vukapic's statement that he intended to treat all Montenegrins as if they had voted for independence. And these were all factors that helped to make the ominous predictions of the conflict after the referendum seem distinctly over-pessimistic. And now I would say that such developments, such as Montenegro's outpacing of Serbia on the road to EU membership, embodied in the recognition of its candidate status, even Montenegro's success in European footballing championships, all sorts of things have encouraged young Montenegrins, increasing number of the young population, if not their parents, to accept Montenegro's independence, together with its new symbols and flags and anthems as symbols of Montenegrin identity. It's interesting, I was talking to a Montenegrin student at Oxford at the moment, and comes from Herceg Novi, very much traditionally